The coffee maker was broken again, which meant I was measuring grounds into a French press at 6:10 in the morning while my daughter recited state capitals from the kitchen table like her life depended on it. Wyoming, Zoe said, not looking up from her cereal. Cheyenne, you always get that one right. I lived there for 2 years before you were born. I poured the water in a slow circle, watching the grounds bloom. Your mom hated the wind. Zoe didn't say anything to that. She never did, not directly, but her eyes moved to the photo on the fridge, the one where Rachel is squinting into the sun at some overlook in the mountains, laughing at something out of frame. Zoe was 8 in that picture. She's 14 now, and some mornings I catch her looking at it the way you'd check a bruise to see if it still hurts. You're gonna be late, she said, which was her way of ending the moment before it got heavy for either of us. She'd inherited that from me, that instinct to close a door gently instead of slamming it. I dropped her at Lincoln Middle at 7:15 and got to Meridian Health Logistics by 7:40, which put me 20 minutes ahead of the warehouse floor and a solid 2 hours ahead of Diane Kessler, who did not believe in mornings the way the rest of us did. I want to be fair about Diane, because I've spent 5 years working for her and it would be easy to make her into something simpler than she is. She isn't lazy, she isn't stupid, she's tired in a way that's gone past visible and settled into permanent. The kind of tired where you stop apologizing for the things you don't have time to do well. She runs 3 regional accounts on a staff built for 2, and somewhere in the last year she stopped pretending that was sustainable and started just surviving it, one fire at a time. Which is why, in November, when the Cheyenne cold storage contract nearly collapsed over a refrigeration unit that failed mid-transit, I was the one who spent 4 nights rerouting insulin shipments through 2 backup carriers I'd built relationships with on my own time. No direction from anyone, just because I knew the account and knew what would happen if 300 vials sat at the wrong temperature for 6 hours. I didn't sleep much that week. I sent Diane updates at 2 a.m. that she read and forwarded to Adrian Calloway with a single line on top: "Our team handled this well overnight." Team. I read that word probably a dozen times. I didn't say anything about it. That's the flaw, if you want to call it that, the thing Rachel used to tease me about gently. Back when she still could. You let things go so they don't cost you anything, she'd say, and one day you're going to look up and realize you gave away 10 years of things that should have cost somebody something. She wasn't wrong. She usually wasn't. I brought it up to Diane on a Thursday in late November, 3 weeks after the Cheyenne save, in the flat gray light of her office with the space heater humming under her desk because building maintenance never got around to the vents on that side of the floor. I want to talk about the regional operations manager opening, I said. I think the Cheyenne recovery makes a pretty clear case. Diane didn't look up from her monitor right away. When she did, her face had the specific exhaustion of someone doing arithmetic she didn't want to do out loud. Marcus, that recovery was a team effort, she said. I don't want to undersell what you did, but Adrian's looking at this role in terms of the acquisition timeline right now, not individual wins. It's not really the moment. When would be the moment? I'll flag you for the next cycle, she said, already turning back to her screen, and I understood, the way you understand weather, that there wasn't going to be a next cycle. Not one that actually arrived. I said thanks and I left, because that's what I do. I've been doing it for 5 years. The drive home that night was slow, the kind of slow that comes with the first real snow of the season catching Denver off guard the way it always does, like the city forgets every single year that winter is a recurring event. I had the radio low in my mind on nothing in particular, replaying nothing, deciding nothing, just driving, tired in the specific way that comes from being good at something nobody's counting. I had no idea, pulling into the half-lit parking garage off Colfax on my way home, that I was about to meet someone who was going to change the shape of everything I thought I understood about how a person gets seen. The garage off Colfax was the kind of half-covered structure that let weather in around the edges. Snow already collecting in drifts along the concrete pillars by the time I pulled in. I was thinking about Zoe's homework, about whether we had anything in the freezer that wasn't chicken, when I saw the taillights. A gray sedan, hazards blinking weak and slow like the battery behind them was already halfway gone, angled crooked across 2 spots near the stairwell. A woman stood beside it in a wool coat too thin for the weather, hood down, hands jammed under her arms, watching the hood like it might tell her something if she stared long enough. I could have kept walking. That's the honest version. I was tired, it was cold, and there's a particular kind of Denver person who's learned not to insert themselves into strangers' problems in dark parking structures, especially not alone, especially not after dark. I almost did keep walking. But she looked up right as I passed, and there was something in her face that wasn't panic, exactly. It was closer to irritation with herself, the look of someone furious that circumstances had put her in a position to need anything from anyone. "You want me to look at it?" I said. "I'm not a mechanic, but I've got jumper cables." She studied me for a second, the way you'd size up a stranger before deciding whether the interruption was worth it. "It's not the battery. It's shifted into something and won't shift back. I've called for a tow. They said 40 minutes, which I suspect means 90. Cold night for 90 minutes. I'm aware." I almost laughed. There was a dryness to how she said it, flat and unbothered, like she'd decided a long time ago that panicking wasted energy better spent elsewhere. "I've got a heater and a working car about 30 feet from here," I said. "You're welcome to wait in it. I'm not going anywhere for a few minutes anyway. Kid's not expecting me for another hour." She hesitated, weighing it the way you weigh a genuine offer against every reason you've ever had to distrust one. Then the wind cut sideways through the garage, snow finding the gap at her collar, and practicality won. "10 minutes, she said. "Then I'll wait in my own car like a reasonable person." She was older than I'd first guessed, 70 at least, silver hair pulled back under a hood she still hadn't raised, with the kind of posture that comes from decades of not slouching in rooms where slouching cost you something. I got my old parka out of the trunk, the good one, and held it out. "You don't need to do that," she said. "I run warm." "You don't." She took it after a second, wrapping it around her shoulders instead of putting her arms through the sleeves, which struck me as its own kind of stubbornness. Accepting the help without fully accepting the help. We sat in my car with the heat running and the wipers ticking off the snow that kept trying to collect on the windshield. "You didn't have to stop," she said eventually. "Wasn't much of a decision." It's always a decision. People just like to pretend it isn't, so they don't have to feel good about making it. She glanced at me sideways. "What do you do that has you leaving a parking garage at 9 at night in a snowstorm?" "Logistics, regional distribution. I coordinate shipping routes. Mostly, I kept it plain. I've got a 14-year-old at home who's better at algebra than I ever was, so tonight's homework help, probably." "No mother in the picture?" It wasn't cruel, the way she asked it. Just direct, the kind of question people stop softening once they've earned the right to skip the padding. "She passed. Little over 2 years now." "I'm sorry." "Yeah, I didn't elaborate, and she didn't push, which I appreciated more than I could have explained." "It's fine. We're fine. Some days more than others." "You strike me as someone who says fine a lot whether or not it's true." I looked at her. "You always this direct with people who just gave you their coat?" "Especially those people," she said, and there was the faintest edge of a smile. "They've usually got something worth listening to." The tow truck's estimate came and went, unsurprisingly. I offered to run her somewhere warmer to wait, and she named a diner 2 exits down, a place called the Wagon Wheel that I'd driven past 100 times without ever stopping. We sat in a corner booth under fluorescent light while a waitress who clearly knew her by name brought 2 coffees without being asked, and for the better part of 40 minutes she asked me more questions than I'd answered from anyone in longer than I wanted to admit. About Zoe, about the job I'd been doing for 5 years without a title that matched it, about why a man who'd rebuilt a collapsing account through 3 sleepless nights hadn't pushed harder for what that was worth. "Some things aren't worth the fight," I said, which sounded thinner out loud than it had in my head. "That's not true," she said. "It's just the thing people tell themselves when they're tired of losing fights they haven't actually had yet." The tow company called her back. Her car was cleared, the flatbed already loading it. She stood, handed me back my coat folded neat over one arm, and reached into her purse for a business card that she didn't hand over, just held, turning it once between 2 fingers before tucking it away again. Like she'd reconsidered something at the last second. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, and I hadn't told her my last name, only realized after she'd said it that I'd never mentioned it, and there wasn't time to ask before she added, "You helped a stranded old woman on a bad night without knowing a single thing about who she was or what it might cost you or get you. Hold on to that, it's rarer than you'd think." She pulled her collar up against the wind at the door and didn't look back, and it wasn't until I was alone in the booth with 2 cooling coffees that I realized she'd never told me her name at all. 9 days went by without a word from anyone about the woman in the diner, and I'd mostly convinced myself the whole night belonged in some file marked strange but forgettable, right up until Adrian Calloway's assistant, a soft-spoken man named Theo, stopped by my desk on a Thursday morning and asked if I had 20 minutes for the CEO. Diane looked up from her own desk when she heard it. I caught the flicker before she smoothed it over, that particular stillness people get when they're recalculating who else might be in a room they thought they controlled. "Any idea what it's about?" she asked, too casually. "No idea," I said, which was true. Adrian's office was on the top floor, glass on two sides, the Rockies laid out behind him in that hard blue morning light that makes the whole state look like it's posing for something. He was younger than I expected for a man who ran a company with his family's name still on half the paperwork, maybe mid-40s, with the kind of easy, slightly distracted warmth of someone who trusted his people more than he double-checked them. "Marcus, thanks for coming up." He gestured at the chair across from his desk, then seemed to reconsider and waved me toward the small seating area by the window instead. "Sit wherever's comfortable." I sat. On the credenza behind him was a row of framed photographs, and one of them stopped me cold. A woman in a hard hat standing in front of a half-built warehouse sometime in what looked like the 80s, laughing at whoever was holding the camera. Older now, obviously, but unmistakably the same steady eyes. The same set to the mouth. "That's my aunt," Adrian said, following my gaze. "Grace. She started this company out of a single leased truck in 1987. Half the reason it still runs the way it does is her, even though she stepped back from day to day years ago." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. "She called me last week. Told me about a man who gave her his coat in a parking garage during that first big snow and sat with her for an hour without knowing who she was. I didn't say anything right away. I was doing the math, and it landed heavier than I expected. She usually doesn't call me about things like that," Adrian went on. "She's not sentimental, so when she does, I pay attention. I didn't do it because I was hoping it would go anywhere," I said, because it felt important that he understood that first. "I know. That's actually the point." He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "I pulled your file after she called. Cheyenne recovery, the insulin reroute in November. That wasn't in any performance review I'd seen. By the way, which tells me something about how information moves through this company that I don't love." He said it plainly, not as an accusation, just an observation he was filing away. "I want to offer you regional operations manager. You'd be over compliance and logistics oversight across all 3 distribution hubs, reporting to me." I felt the floor of the moment shift under me the way it does when something you've stopped expecting finally arrives. "There's a second part," Adrian said. "We're mid-process on an acquisition. Vantage Health Partners is doing due diligence right now, which means every operational file in this building is about to get read by people who don't work here and don't owe anyone loyalty. I need someone running a genuine internal review before they do, cold chain logs, vendor compliance, the fleet's maintenance records." Diane's stretched thin enough that I don't think she's had the bandwidth to look closely at all of it herself. "You want me looking at her division specifically?" "I want you looking at all of it," he said. "Hers included." I trust Diane. I also know trust isn't the same thing as verification, and right now verification is what the buyers are going to want. He held my eyes for a second. "Grace didn't ask me to give you anything, Marcus. I want to be straight about that. She told me a story about a decent man. What I did with it after that is on me, and it's because your work justifies it." I said yes. I shook his hand, and it was steady, and I meant it when I said thank you. And I walked out past Diane's office without looking in, though I felt her eyes on me the whole way to the elevator. It wasn't until I was back at my own desk, staring at the new access credentials Theo had already emailed over, that the shape of what I'd actually been handed settled in. Not a reward, a door into every file in the building. At the exact moment someone with something to hide would have every reason to want that door to stay shut. I decided, sitting there with the cursor blinking over the compliance folder, that I wasn't going to treat this like a gift. I was going to treat it like the job it actually was, and do it properly, whatever it turned up. The compliance folder took longer to open than I expected, not because of any technical problem, but because once I had access to 6 years of temperature logs across 3 distribution hubs, I had to decide where to actually start looking. I picked the most recent quarter first, on the theory that if something was wrong, the freshest data would be the easiest to catch mid-pattern. It took 2 days of cross-referencing before I found the first thing that didn't sit right. The refrigerated fleet logged temperature readings automatically every 15 minutes during transit, uploaded to a shared server the moment a truck came back into range of the warehouse network. Straightforward, in theory, but when I lined the automated upload timestamps against the manually entered compliance sheets Diane's division submitted to corporate each week, 3 shipments in November showed readings that didn't match. Not wildly off, half a degree here, a degree there, always nudged just inside the acceptable range on the manual sheet when the raw upload data showed brief excursions above it. Half a degree doesn't sound like much until you remember what's riding in those trucks. Insulin, certain vaccines, products with tolerances built for a reason, not a suggestion. I didn't say anything to anyone yet. I pulled the data quietly, cross-checked it twice, and then went looking for someone who might be able to tell me whether I was imagining a pattern or looking at one. Ray Delgado had been driving the western route for going on 9 years, longer than almost anyone else on the floor, and he had the kind of face that gave things away before his mouth caught up. I found him in the break room on a Tuesday afternoon, refilling his coffee, and I asked him, casually, how the trucks had been running lately. Fine, he said, too fast. No issues with the units? Cooling holding steady? He glanced toward the hallway before he answered, which told me more than the answer itself. Unit 3's been finicky since October. I've mentioned it. Mentioned it to who? Diane. He said it like the name cost him something. A couple times. And? Ray looked at his coffee for a second too long. Look, Marcus, I've got 2 kids and a mortgage, and I like this job. I'm not trying to get in the middle of anything. I'm not asking you to get in the middle of anything. I'm asking if the unit's been cooling properly. It hasn't, not always. He said it low, fast, like he wanted it out of his mouth and gone. I logged it in the truck's own system every time, because I wasn't about to have my name attached to a shipment that wasn't right. But what goes on the sheet that goes upstairs? That's not always what I write in the cab. Who changes it? He shook his head, already backing toward the door. I didn't say anybody changes anything. I said I don't know what happens to it after it leaves my hands. That's all I'm saying. That's the whole thing. He left before I could ask another question. And I let him go, because pushing right then would have cost me more than it got me. I went to Naomi Reyes in HR 2 days later, not because I had enough yet to make an accusation, but because I needed to understand the reporting chain before I did anything that couldn't be walked back. Naomi was maybe 40, precise in the way people get when they've spent years watching well-meaning complaints blow up in someone's face, and she listened to my careful, mostly hypothetical questions about compliance reporting procedures with her hands folded and her expression giving away exactly nothing. Are you telling me you have a concern, she said finally, or are you telling me you're thinking about having one? I don't have enough yet to call it a concern. Then let's not call it one yet. She wasn't dismissive, exactly. Careful was the better word. Marcus, I believe you're asking in good faith. But I've had 2 people in 5 years come to me with partial pictures about Diane's division, and both times it turned out to be an honest misunderstanding of the reporting software. If you bring me something, bring me all of it, not because I don't trust you. Because half a case against a division director doesn't protect anybody, including you. It wasn't a no. It also wasn't the ally I'd hoped for, and I left her office understanding that whatever I built, I'd be building it alone for a while longer. That evening, running one more pass through the transit logs before I called it a night, I noticed the warehouse dock cameras still active on my terminal from an earlier pull. Diane was on the floor near the loading bay, alone, well past when her team usually cleared out, standing in front of the same refrigerated unit Ray had mentioned with a clipboard in one hand and her phone pressed to her ear with the other. Even through grainy security footage, I could read the tension in her shoulders, the particular stillness of someone holding a conversation they didn't want overheard. I told myself it was nothing. Division directors worked late, vendors called at odd hours. There were a dozen ordinary explanations, and I made myself list every one of them on the drive home. It was the email waiting in my inbox the next morning that made the ordinary explanations harder to believe. Diane had CC'd me on a message to Adrian, subject line compliance review, scope clarification, worded pleasantly enough on the surface, asking whether the pre-acquisition audit was intended to cover manual reporting discrepancies or strictly automated system data, since she wanted to make sure I wasn't duplicating effort already covered by her team's own internal checks. It read like nothing. It read like exactly the kind of careful, procedural question a stretched thin director might ask to keep an overlapping audit from stepping on her toes. But I hadn't told anyone, not Adrian, not Naomi, not a single person in that building, that I'd already pulled the manual reporting sheets and lined them up against the raw upload data. Diane knew exactly where I'd been looking. The meeting request from Adrian came through less than 24 hours later, and I knew before I even opened the invite that this wasn't going to be about scope clarification. Adrian's office had lost some of its easy warmth by the time I sat down across from him. He didn't go to the seating area this time. He stayed behind his desk, which told me something before he said a word. Diane came to see me yesterday, he said. She's concerned about the audit. Specifically, she's concerned about you. Concerned how? She says you've been pulling records outside the agreed scope, going around her team directly to drivers, creating what she called an unnecessarily adversarial atmosphere during a sensitive pre-acquisition period. He watched my face while he said it, careful, not accusing, just laying it out. She used the word retaliatory, Marcus. Said it might stem from resentment over the promotion timeline. That's not what's happening. I didn't say I believed it. I said she said it. He rubbed a hand across his jaw. But I've got evaluators walking through this building in 6 weeks, and the last thing I need during due diligence is a formal complaint about workplace conduct sitting in a file somewhere. I need to pause the audit's access to driver interviews and direct data pulls until I understand what's actually going on here. Adrian, if you pause this now, right when? I'm not shutting it down, he said, cutting in gently but firmly. I'm pausing the parts that are generating friction. You keep the desk review. Anything that requires talking to staff or pulling records outside standard reporting channels goes through me first, for now. He held my eyes. This isn't me choosing her over you. This is me trying to keep the whole thing from blowing up before the sale closes. I understood the logic. That didn't make it easier to sit there and watch my authority get quietly folded up in front of me. 3 weeks before whatever Diane was hiding would either surface or bury itself for good. Ray wouldn't answer his phone that week. I tried twice, left one voicemail I immediately regretted the tone of, and finally caught him in the parking lot on a Thursday evening, keys already in his hand. I can't talk right now, he said, not meeting my eyes. Ray, 2 minutes. I've got a wife and kids, Marcus, and I heard there's a complaint with my name near it now, even though I never signed anything, never said anything on the record. I don't know how that got out, but it did, and I've got a route to run tomorrow and I need this job. He finally looked at me, and there was more fear in it than anger. I'm sorry, I can't be the guy who talks. He got in his truck and left, and I stood there in the cold a long time after his taillights disappeared, understanding exactly how thoroughly the ground had shifted under me in 4 days. I told Zoe some of it that night, not all of it, sitting at the kitchen table over reheated pasta while she picked at her homework with one earbud in. You look like you did after the thing with the Cheyenne account, she said, without looking up. The face you get when you're deciding whether to fight or just let it go. It's not the same situation. It's exactly the same situation. She pulled the earbud out, which was how I knew she meant it. Dad, you always do this. Something good happens, and then the second it gets hard, you start finding reasons to shrink it back down so it doesn't cost you anything. She wasn't cruel about it. She'd learned that particular clarity somewhere, and I suspected some of it was her mother's voice living on in her. Mom used to say that about you. That you'd rather be safe than right. She said that? She said it with love, Zoe said, but yeah, I didn't sleep much that night. Running the numbers in my head, not the temperature logs, but the actual cost-benefit of pushing forward against a director who just demonstrated she could turn my own diligence into a liability with one conversation. Naomi called me in the next morning, and this time her office didn't have the same careful neutrality it had a few weeks earlier. I heard about the complaint, she said. I want to be straight with you. I looked into it myself, quietly, before deciding whether I believed it. She slid a folder half an inch toward me. Ray never filed anything. There's no formal complaint with his name on it, not officially. Diane characterized a conversation as a complaint. That's not the same thing, and I told Adrian as much this morning. Something in my chest loosened for the first time in days. Why now? Because I've been doing this long enough to recognize when someone's building a story faster than the facts can catch up to it, Naomi said. And because the temperature discrepancies you flagged for me last week, the 3 November shipments, I ran them against our incident reporting system myself. None of those excursions were ever logged as required. Not one. That's not a scope disagreement, Marcus. That's a documentation gap that shouldn't exist if the manual sheets were accurate. I sat with that for a moment, feeling the shape of the fight ahead of me solidify into something I could actually hold onto instead of just suspect. I need something Diane can't massage or explain away, I said slowly. Not driver testimony, not a manual sheet anybody could argue was a clerical error. What are you thinking? The trucks log their own data independently, straight off the sensor, uploaded automatically before anyone's hands touch it, I said. I want that raw feed for every shipment in the last 6 months, pulled directly from the vehicle systems, not from anything that passes through her division first. Naomi was quiet for a second, weighing it the way she weighed everything. That data belongs to fleet operations, not to Diane's team. You wouldn't need her sign off to request it. No, I said, I wouldn't. The fleet data took 4 days to arrive in full, longer than I expected, because 6 months of raw sensor logs across 3 hubs turned out to be a genuinely enormous amount of information. I spent most of those 4 days building a single clean visualization, shipment dates on one axis, temperature readings on the other, the automated sensor data plotted directly against what had been submitted on the manual compliance sheets. When I finally laid the two lines next to each other, the gaps weren't subtle anymore. 11 excursions in 6 months. Every single one smoothed flat on the paperwork that had gone to corporate. The regional town hall was scheduled for the second week of February, the kind of meeting that existed on the calendar every quarter but this time carried actual weight, because the private equity evaluators were flying in specifically to sit through it. Adrian had asked me to prepare a short operational update as part of the agenda. He hadn't asked me to bring what I was bringing. I hadn't told him yet, and some part of me understood that not telling him was itself a decision I'd have to answer for later. The conference room on the top floor filled slowly that morning, the Rockies laid out sharp and white behind the glass, snow still holding in the high country even as the city below had gone muddy with late winter thaw. 3 evaluators from the acquiring firm sat along one side of the table with identical leather folios in front of them. Grace sat near the end, quiet, unassuming in a gray cardigan, exactly the way she'd sat in that diner booth 2 months earlier. Diane took her place at the front with a laptop already open, visibly composed, a woman who had clearly rehearsed what she was about to say. She walked the room through her division's quarterly compliance summary first. Clean numbers, a single flagged excursion in December, resolved same day, well within tolerance. She used words like robust and industry-leading, and I watched 2 of the evaluators nodding along, already halfway to writing it into their report. When Adrian opened the floor for questions, I asked to add something to the record. I felt Diane's eyes land on me before I'd even stood up. I kept it simple. I said that as part of the pre-acquisition operational review, I'd pulled the automated sensor logs directly from the refrigerated fleet's onboard systems, data that uploaded independently the moment each truck returned into network range, untouched by any manual reporting process. I said I wanted to walk the room through what that data showed, because it didn't match what had just been presented. I put the 2 charts up side by side. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when people are doing arithmetic they don't want to be doing out loud. 11 excursions where the sensor data showed 1. Insulin and vaccine shipments that had spent stretches of time above threshold that the paperwork sent to corporate had never reflected at all. This is a raw data artifact, Diane said, and her voice was even, professional, the voice of someone still trying to hold the room. Onboard sensors misfire constantly in cold weather. Anyone who's worked fleet operations knows that. I checked for that, I said. I cross-referenced against the maintenance logs for each unit involved. Only one of the 11 incidents coincides with a documented sensor fault, and that one was already flagged and corrected in October. The other 10 have no maintenance record indicating equipment failure. One of the evaluators, a woman near the end of the table, had stopped writing entirely. Diane's composure held for another moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, it didn't. Her hand moved to close her laptop and stopped halfway, like she'd forgotten what she meant to do with it. I'd need to review this data myself before I can respond to specifics, she said, and something in her tone had shifted from confident to careful, the sound of someone recalculating in real time how much ground she still had left to stand on. You're welcome to, I said. I documented everything, every shipment, every timestamp, cross-referenced against your division's submitted compliance sheets for the same dates. I can have it in front of you within the hour. I hadn't brought Ray into the room, and I wasn't going to. What I had instead was a written statement he'd finally agreed to sign 3 days earlier, after Naomi walked him through what protections actually existed once something was formally on the record rather than a private conversation in a parking lot. I didn't read it aloud. I simply noted, for the room, that a driver's sworn account corroborated the timeline the sensor data showed, and that the statement was available to review alongside everything else. Diane didn't ask to see it. Adrian had been quiet through most of it, his expression unreadable in the particular way of a man absorbing something faster than he could organize a response to it. When he finally spoke, his voice was level, not unkind, but final. I think we need to pause here, he said. Diane, I'd like you to step out for a few minutes while we work through the rest of this. She looked at him for a long second, and whatever she'd been holding together through the last 10 minutes finally slipped, just at the edges, not tears, not anger. Something closer to the specific exhaustion of a person watching a structure they'd been quietly propping up for months finally give way. She closed her laptop the rest of the way, gathered it against her chest, and walked out without another word. Nobody spoke while the door clicked shut behind her. I looked at Grace, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read, and at Adrian, who exhaled slowly and rubbed a hand across his face before looking back up at the room full of evaluators still absorbing what they just watched happen in front of them. I'll need everything you have, Adrian said quietly, to me. Today, Diane's resignation letter came in 2 days later, before any termination proceedings had formally begun. Addressed to Adrian in language so brief and procedural that it told me she'd made her decision the moment she walked out of that conference room. There was no attempt to explain, no request for a final conversation. She cleared her desk on a Thursday afternoon while most of the floor was in a scheduled logistics meeting, and by the time I came back from it, her office sat empty, the nameplate already gone from the door. I heard secondhand, weeks later, that she'd taken a job outside the industry entirely. Something with no cold chain, no compliance reporting, nothing that could ever again put her in a position where a shortfall she couldn't afford to fix might turn into a decision she couldn't afford to live with. I didn't feel triumphant hearing it. Mostly I felt the particular tiredness that comes after carrying something heavy for a long time and finally getting to set it down. The company spent the following weeks overhauling how compliance actually worked. Automated sensor data became the primary record instead of a backup to manual sheets. Every driver got a direct, protected channel to flag equipment issues without routing through a division head first. Ray came by my office once, not long after the changes went in, just to say that the new system meant he'd never again have to decide between his paycheck and putting something on the record. I told him he'd been the one who made the record possible in the first place. He didn't have much to say to that, but he shook my hand longer than the moment probably called for. Adrian offered me the safety, a role that hadn't existed before, built specifically around what the audit had exposed. He didn't frame it as a reward. He said the company needed someone who'd already proven he'd do the work honestly even when it cost him something, and that was the only qualification that mattered anymore. I said yes without the hesitation that had followed me through every promotion conversation I'd ever had before this one. I told Zoe that night, sitting across from her at the kitchen table with the late winter light coming thin and gold through the window behind her. "So you did the thing," she said, not looking up from her homework right away. "I did the thing." She looked up then, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen in a long time, not since before her mother died, a kind of unguarded pride that she usually kept tucked behind teenage indifference. Mom would have said something annoying right now. Like, "Told you so." She probably would have. I'm not gonna say it. She went back to her homework, the corner of her mouth still fighting a smile. But I'm thinking it really loud. We drove out to the diner off Colfax that weekend, the same corner booth, the same waitress who still seemed to know Grace's coffee order without asking. Grace was already there when we arrived, sitting with her hands wrapped around her mug exactly the way she had the first night I'd met her, though the wool coat was gone now, replaced by something lighter for the season finally starting to turn. "You look different." She signed nothing, of course, she wasn't Elliot. But she said it the same way, direct, unhurried. "Lighter." I put something down, I said, and she nodded like she'd known that's what would happen before I did. "I didn't help you because I thought you'd end up running a division," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I know. I helped you because you were kind to a stranded old woman on a bad night, and it turned out that was the whole answer to a question I didn't know I was still asking." She looked at Zoe, then back at me. "Some people only show you who they are when it costs them nothing. You showed me who you were when it would have cost you everything, twice." I didn't have a clean response to that, so I let it sit, the way she taught me to let things sit back in November. Driving home later, Zoe asleep against the window with the streetlights sliding gold across her face, I thought about how many years I'd spent making myself smaller so nothing would ever have the chance to knock me down. Steady, reliable, useful exactly up to the point where usefulness became invisible. I wasn't going to be furniture in my own life anymore. Not for anyone, and not even for the fear that had kept me quiet for so long.